Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Stihl FS45 string trimmer. Customer states that he bought a aftermarket carb kit, no, a whole carburetor, but it came with some other parts, I guess. And he installed it and he can't get it to run right. He doesn't know how to adjust the carburetor, or he's not sure if there's something else going on. So, our job is to determine if he even needed a carb kit. You know, maybe he's got a crank seal out or something like that. We're going to spend a little time just looking at his installation of this carb kit and make sure that that's all good to go. And then we'll try and test run it. If it runs halfway decent, we'll just adjust the carburetor. If it doesn't want to run right, well, then maybe we have to dig into it a little bit deeper. You know, a pressure test in a string trimmer, you can almost replace the thing in exchange for the amount of labor it takes. So check this out, though. I'm looking in the cylinder for scoring, but when I pull the spark plug out, it's got red and pink something on the insulator. I mean, the fuel that he had in the tank had an oil in it that had blue dye. So where is this red and this pink coming from? Continuing to look into the cylinder, it's clean and shiny. So, I don't know. We're going to take a look at the carburetor a little bit here. But the first thing I find is a brand new air filter that just happens to be the same color pink as the insulator of my spark plug. I'm guessing some spit back in the out of the carburetor to wet down the filter, and the dye in the filter being drawn back in through the engine. I don't know. That's all I got. I mean, the spark plug didn't really look like it had much for runtime on it. If you got any other ideas on that, let me know. Let's see if this thing runs. It primes. Choke seems to be sealing right. Turn the switch on. Alright, it doesn't really run, does it? I mean, when he bought that kit and bolted the carb on, I'm sure he assumed that it was going to be 2 pulls and it'd be running smooth, right? That's not the case here. But we don't know if it's the problem with the carb kit, or if it's a problem with the installation of the kit, or if there's something else wrong with the trimmer that it didn't even need a carb kit to begin with. Who knows? There's 2 nuts. It needs an 8mm wrench to get them off. Once we remove those nuts, we can remove the air filter base. Here's our carburetor, all shiny and new. I'm going to crack the fuel cap so I can remove the lines and not take a shower in gasoline. Get the first one off easy enough. Second one's a little bit stubborn. There we go. And then the only thing left holding it on is the throttle wire. Now I want to take a look at the pulse port in the carburetor, the intake manifold, and the gasket. Because one common problem is that that stuff won't all line up when you buy an aftermarket carb. But in this case, the hole in the gasket's in the right spot, and that lines up with the hole, the pulse hole in the carburetor. Just confirm that. We'll lay the gasket over the carb, and sure enough, the gasket lines up with the hole in the pulse hole. So that ain't our problem. Kind of hoping it would be. It'd be an easy fix. And I've seen it before. We're talking with some other mechanics. It's a pretty common thing to buy an aftermarket carb and have that problem where the pulse hole doesn't line up. So let's look inside this thing once. I mean, it looks like it's got the good fuel pump in it. I'm trying to decide if there's any schmutz in the micro screen. It didn't really look... I mean, there was no physical stuff in there, but maybe a little bit of scum. I don't really think so, but when I blew it out, it looked clean, so fair enough. The other side of the carb, we don't need to look at that. It's a brand new carb. I just assume that it's right. You know, it would have been the time to do it when I had it all apart, but... So there is our connection point for our throttle wire. The ferrule of the wire has to fit in that, right in there. We just got to get it lined up. And when you do this, take a look at that linkage on the carb, because sometimes there's a big end and a little end, and you got to make sure that the ferrule fits into the big end. The cable holder up on top there, that kind of gets snapped down into a certain place. It locks in. But right now the carb's not flush with the intake. And the reason for that is one of those green fuel lines is still hung up underneath the carb. I'm kind of pinching it. So once we get this out of the way, that carb will drop right down. You can see now that the studs are sticking up through the carburetor. Then we just push the fuel lines on in place. And there we go. We installed our carburetor. Looks good. Checking the function of the throttle. That looked good. Let's put that air filter base back on. Now, some of these have non-flanged nuts. All right, when it's a flanged nut, you can just preload your socket and spin the nut on. When it's a non-flanged nut, if you try to put it in the socket, it's just going to ride all the way up to the top of the socket. So one way to do it is to put the nut on a magnet and then start it on the stud. You just drop it on there, and you know the magnet's got enough power to get that nut started. Then we can put our T-handle on there and run the nuts home. What we're going to do is we're going to try and start this thing, and if it does start, we're going to do some carb adjustments. And if that pans out for us, then that's all I'm going to have on the Stihl FS45. That, what did it need anyway? Oh, it really just needed a carburetor adjustment. Thanks for watching. Later.